Reading Boys Mock C Paper 1 Review. Looking here at the instructions, you can quickly recap and remind yourself of what you were instructed to do. You'll have had 35 minutes to work through the sections. Make sure, as of course this is a Reading Boys exam, that of note we would have been writing things in a black pen, and then you'll notice at the beginning the instructions do highlight, for example, how to make mistakes and cross them out with a black pen, because obviously you can't use an eraser. And of course on your sheet you may have your own workings that you can compare against the workings I'm going to produce now. So jumping into the comprehension, you can see here you'll have been given an opportunity to shade in your answers as follows. And the one thing that obviously stands out is that you'd be crossing out the answers and highlighting them if you make a mistake. Because of this, we do recommend, of course, that you try very hard to make sure you're not going to just guess the answer straight away. Do take a moment to think about it, be confident, because you don't want to be making multiple mistakes, and it can get quite confusing if you're trying to change answers multiple times. So, looking here at the example, it reads, were the narrator's companions lying? And in this case, they were lying in their corners. And one of the sort of strategies that I'd be utilising for this is just to make sure I can find where it references this in the text, just to ensure that I've got my answer clear. So in this case, they were lying, and we want to read in their corners, so lay still in their corners. I think that's just quite sensible as a method. Next one, when I felt my mind clear. What type of word is felt? Especially in this situation where it gives you a line number, I would just go back and check and make sure it's perfectly clear. And in this case, we think the answer is a verb. That's because felt is a feeling, and quite often we say verbs are our ing words. So those are the practice examples. Let's now jump into the text. So here it is. You see we've adapted this passage from The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. Very good book, well worth reading. And again, just make sure you notice things like, for example, the page numbers down the left-hand side that we're going to use to check back in on any of the questions that reference the page numbers for sure, and possibly even check again later. So let's just start running through the answers. You can see, I'm sure, hopefully, as you went through this, you were highlighting things and making clear notes. Looking now at number 1. How many years had the narrator been studying Sherlock Holmes? In this case, 8 years. Number 2. What type of case was the narrator not able to find reference to? An ordinary case, a boring case. Sherlock Holmes has no interest in the boring or the mundane. He likes the special, interesting, hard ones, the challenge cases. Number 3. What was Holmes' approach to taking on cases? He took only the most extraordinary, which I'm sure are also the most interesting. Number 4. Why was the narrator able to talk about the case now? And it's because the lady to whom he had pledged secrecy, that means the person he promised to keep it a secret for, had now died, so he was able to talk about the case. Number 5. Why was the narrator glad that the facts were now out in the open? It means he could dispel the rumours. Number 6. Why was the narrator surprised at his clock in the morning? In this case, it was far too early for Holmes to be out. It's traditional for Sherlock normally is up all night and then, of course, sleeps in late kind of person. Number 7. What is the common lot Holmes talks about in line 24? And it's the fact that everyone else seems to be getting woken up early. And in this case, if it says line 24 and the common lot, I would certainly go back to the passage, find line 24, and just read again. Very sorry to wake you, Mr. Watson, but it's the common lot this morning. And so this is where I would be just checking back, making sure I find that context and understand what they're referring to. So here we are, number 7. So the fact that everyone else seemed to be getting up early as well. Number 8. Why had the young lady turned up? Because she urgently wanted to tell Sherlock Holmes something. Number 9. Which word best describes Watson's view of Holmes' skills? Or, in this case, to just quickly run through the vocabulary, apathy is kind of like laziness, boredom, uninterested. Lethargy means the same. If you're feeling very lethargic, you're slow. Suspicious obviously means, you're viewing something with suspicion. Or is just how you're incredibly impressed. And I think that's the standard Watson approach, to be sort of very impressed by Sherlock's clever brain. Number 10. What did heavily veiled refer to? In this case, her clothing. So when it says the lady's attire, that means what she's wearing. And if she's heavily veiled, it's obviously she's wearing clothes in a secretive fashion to try and hide away who she is. We might often refer to, for example, a veiled bride. Quite often the bride will wear some sort of veil as they walk up to when they're getting married. That's Probably the most common time you'd come across someone wearing a veil nowadays. Number 11. Why was Holmes pleased with Mrs. Hudson? Because she had lit the fire. Number 12. For all his intuition, what did Holmes get wrong? Why the lady was shivering. So it's the fact not that she was afraid of the fire, it was the fact that she was shivering, what he thought it was because of the fire, but actually no, it's because she's so concerned. Number 13. Which word describes the visitor? She was haunted, which kind of means afraid. Again, reference to that being fear. She's seen something very scary that's affected her. Number 14. Occurred in the early days. In this context, what type of word is early? Well, it's a description of the days. They are the early days. So in this case, it's an adjective because it's describing it. Be careful, in this case, it's not an adverb because days is not a verb. So it's not a description of the verb, it's a description of the days. So an adjective. Number 15. A little resentment on line 22. What word is most similar in meaning to the resentment as used in this box? In this case, you may want to read back and read the sentence before and after, but if you resent something, you're bitter about it, you have a strong dislike for it, so bitterness, it would be like kind of you're holding a grudge or you're upset about something. Just very quickly with words, a reprieve is like a pardon. If you redress something, you fix it, and obviously involvement means you get involved. So in this case, bitterness makes the most sense. 16. With premature grey, what word is most similar in meaning to premature? Simply early. So if you have premature grey hair, it means your grey hair is happening earlier than it would normally happen. So maybe as a younger person. Right, everyone, that was the last question for the comprehend section. So we're now going to jump into the word meanings. In this case, it's really important you always check, and so I've actually underlined it here, and something I'd recommend you always do whenever you come across one of these word meaning sections. Are we working out the synonyms or the antonyms, the same words or the opposite words? And it's always worth clarifying because they can look so very similar. So I think it's just a rule of thumb because you'd hate to make that silly mistake. And it's one of the easiest mistakes and the most catastrophic to get those muddled around. So always double check and ensure you know what you're doing. So for these questions, we'll be looking for words that mean the same or nearly the same. Looking here at the example, we've got lively, and then from lively we have lament, jealous, boisterous, becalmed and lazy. In this case, if you've got a lively party or some lively kids, they're being a bit boisterous, it means virtually the same thing. They're both full of energy, full of beans, charging around the place, probably causing a bit of chaos. Right, everyone, so let's jump into it. So, harmony, the closest I think is agreement. If things are in harmony, they agree, it's all balanced and no issues. Number 2, hideous obviously means ugly. Unedifying means something that you wouldn't want to look at. So in this case, unedifying is the closest. Number 3, if you impair something, you stop it from working properly. So the closest there is you damage it. Number 4, if you imitate someone, you copy them. And if you emulate someone, you copy them. So in this case, imitate and emulate are the same. Number 5, if you designate something, you might, for example, designate a target. Let's say you're out in the garden playing a sport, and you might try and throw a ball at a target. You've designated that tree over there. It means the same as say you've nominated it, you've picked something out. Selected, I would say they both mean to select. Number 6, if you're reserved, perhaps you're quiet, perhaps you might use a word that's sort of similar to shy. Well, if you're reticent to do something, it also means you're sort of hesitant or perhaps not very confident. So I think reserved and reticent are the closest words. If something diminishes, it sort of wanes over time, it gets less. Equally, I think if you reduce something over time, it gets less, becomes a smaller amount. So I think diminish and reduce are the closest words there. Number 8, if someone is conceited, they're sort of proud or prideful or vain might be a word. So arrogant here is the closest. Someone who's a bit arrogant, a bit cocky. Normally to be conceited and arrogant would be considered not an insult, but certainly not a compliment. You don't want to be arrogant or overly proud. Number 9, a mirage is something that you can see that isn't really there. So quite often if they're talking about in the desert, explorers might be walking across the desert and they may see a mirage, which is kind of what they want to see, really, of like an oasis that's not actually there. So in that case, you're looking at a picture that's not really there. I think a vision is the next closest. So D is the answer for number 9. Number 10, if things wane, I think I already said that word earlier, they get less, and dwindle also means to get less. So again, you could say the synonyms of, I think, the one from the page before, which is reduce and get smaller. So diminish, reduce, wane and dwindle would actually all be synonyms as well. Number 11, if you insist on something, you demand it. You say it must happen. So hopefully at Teach Right we insist on everyone doing lots of practice and revision over the holidays. I'm sure that's been going on because we think it's so good for you. Number 12, if you highlight something or select something in particular, it's something that's specific. So if I like a particular type of chocolate, it means I like a specific chocolate bar, not just anything. I have maybe a favourite one. I'm sure that's the case for most people. They've got a favourite. Number 13, if someone is articulate, they are eloquent. And I have to say, one of the nice side effects from learning all this amazing vocabulary is you will become very articulate and hopefully then speak eloquently, which is, clearly using good words, using good vocabulary, and sounding very clever, and hopefully putting across a good first impression. Number 14, if something is enduring, if it endures for a long time, it is long-lasting. And in this case, number A, lasting, I think is the closest. Say it goes on for a long time or survive for a long time. Number 15, if you abscond, it means you get out of there, you run away, you get out. And so I think the closest would be D, escape, which is obviously very similar. You might abscond from a meeting early to say, oh, I'm sorry, I don't think I need to do this anymore. I've got to head off and do some other work. That would be absconding, you're escaping. Number 16, if you're vying for something, you are competing. You might often see this sort of in a boxing match, for example. The two boxers are vying for supremacy. They're vying to see who the winner's going to be. So it's just a good word that means sort of competing over something. Quite often used in the context of winning or trying to become in a winning position. 17, if something is manifest, it is very clear. It is evident. Now, you might also manifest things to use it in a different context, but that's a different word. So in this case, if something is manifest, it is evident. So for example, it might be the case that it is manifest that the sun comes up in the morning and goes down at night. It means it is clear, it is almost like obvious, you could say. A good synonym. Number 18, if someone is described or something is described as being burly, it kind of means big and bulky and strong. So here, a strapping young man or a burly young man means a big, strong athlete. So for example, I think most footballers nowadays, they do lots of exercise, and so they're strapping as part of their exercise regime to be able to do really, really well in all their sports. Certainly rugby players would be very big and burly and strapping. Number 19, predominant, I would say sort of means main. And so here, the main person, like the predominant, or I don't know, for example, in a show, you may have like the predominant actor, the main chief actor. And so I think here chief is the answer, because again, it means like the main, the number one, the head, the captain, things that reference to sort of being the top or the most important person. Could also be actually the issue. So you might have a predominant issue that you need to deal with. A chief issue is kind of like your number one priority to fix. Number 20, succulent. Often we just describe food as being succulent. It's a big compliment normally, because succulent means juicy and often quite well associated with being lovely, delicious. So when we're talking about fruit, that's normally if you go to the shop and you buy some really nice, high quality, succulent fruit. It's juicy, it's lovely, it's delicious. It's exactly the kind of thing that you would want. So succulent and juicy for the answer. And those were our questions. Hopefully that made sense. Again, one thing obviously I've not focused on in this case, but I would certainly recommend as part of a revision, do go through all the words this time that weren't the answers, and just flick back through and make sure that you know them. You could use a dictionary, but equally it'd be just as valuable to look them up online, as long as you then make the effort to go away and learn the vocabulary. That's a lovely way of getting a bit more value out of this type of question. Don't just learn the question, the answer, learn the other words as well, because of course next time you may find that it's one of the ones that wasn't used today that is an answer in the next test, or perhaps the real one as well. Moving on to the math section, in this case, there is a slight difference in that we're not shading in our answers, we're simply writing the answer in a box. And again, you do have an opportunity, if there is a mistake, to cross it out and improve upon your answer. But as always, try and be confident before you put the answer in, because you certainly don't want to be making mistakes twice or more than twice, because then it starts to get very messy and you sort of start running out of pages and difficulty. Looking here at the two examples, it says I eat a quarter of a pie and my friend eats half. How much pie is left? So in this case, we need to have a quarter of a half, but also then work out how much is left over. So if you've eaten a quarter and a half, that adds up to 3/4 that is eaten. But it's a bit of a trick here, and this is what sort of highlights these 10 questions. They are ones you've got to sort of think about in a bit more detail. I would say they're a bit more sort of problem-solving questions. If you've eaten 3/4, 1/4 is left over. Here it also says a man buys a car for £800. Over time it loses 10%. How much is it worth now? Well, you'd need to work out that 10% is £80. And then from there, do the one more step, which is take that £80 off. Sorry, that £80 off, the 10% off, because it's lost that much, so it's now worth 720. So again, an example of not just being a single step, but a couple of steps to work out the answer. Okay then, jumping into number 1. A group of holidaymakers were asked which modes of transport they had used to go on their last 3 holidays, and the results are shown below. How many did not use the train? So we want to know all of the people who are not in this circle and what the number adds up to. Because anyone in this circle used the train, and we want to know who many people did not use the plane. So that would be the 34 people who only used the plane. That would include the 9 people who used the trains and the boat. It would include the 12 people who only used the boat. But it would also, of course, include the 20 people who didn't use either a plane, train, or a boat. So that might be a car or walking or some other mode of transport that's not one of the options. So what we then do need to do, of course, is add these together. Now, it's always worth checking, is there a nice friendly way of adding them using your number bond? So, for example, there was a 6 and a 4. I might be looking to make that add up to 10. But in this case, there's no nice one. So I'm just going to do 34 plus 20, which is 54, plus 9, which is 63, plus 12, which is 75. And so our answer, I believe, for this question is 75. Jumping into the next one. I am thinking of a number. So some unknown number. I double it. I add 40. And then I halve it, which is the same as saying divide by 2. And that equals 30. What number were we thinking of originally? Well, if we want to work this out, we have to do the process in reverse. So starting with 30, I'm going to do the opposite of dividing by 2, which is timesing by 2. So I'm at 60 now, so I'm going to keep track of that down here. I then do the opposite of adding 40, which of course is to subtract 40. So 60 subtract 40 is 20. And then I want to do the opposite of timesing by 2, which is dividing by 2, which means I end up with 10. So I think that x is 10. If I needed to, I could check this by just doing the process again. So 10 times 2 plus 40 divided by 2 does equal 30. Good. So I'm confident with my answer is 10. Krishan has twice as many toys as Flo. Lucy has 3 times as many toys as Krishan. And if they have 81 toys between them, how many does Floy have? So Flo has some number. I'm going to call that x. I'm going to use this as a bit of unknown. Krishan has twice as many toys as Flo. So he's going to, if Flo has x, he's going to have 2 lots of x. But again, this could be a question mark. I'm just using x as like a symbol to represent what's going on. A few ways of doing this. Lucy has 3 times as many toys as Krishan. Well, he had 2 lots of x, which is twice as much as Flo's. So if he's got 3 times, he's going to have, actually, compared to the original amount, 6. So this is all of our amounts of Flo. So Flo's amount, 2 lots of Flo's amount for Krishan, and 6 lots of Flo's amount for Lucy. And if in total this all adds up to equal 81, that means that 6 plus 2 plus 1x means we've got 9 lots of x, 9 lots of something, and that equals 81. So if 9 lots of something equals 81, what is that something? Well, I think it's going to be 9 times the unknown, which is 9 times 9 equals 81. Which means the x, another way of writing this would be to say, of course, that the x equals 81. Because this is our value, this is what the x was, or this is what the x needs to be to make 81. And in this case, going back to our list, this was Flo's amount, this was Krishan's, and this was Lucy. The question says, how many toys does Flo have? Well, if x is 9 and Flo has x, the answer is 9. If we needed to, for a different question, work out how many Christian had, for example, we'd have done 2 times x, so 2 times 9. And that way we could actually have worked out how many each of the people had. But this is the setup I recommend, and this sort of approach of really carefully thinking, well, if Flo has some amount, and Christian has the amount, and Lucy has the amount based on Christian, you can sort of build up this, and this understanding that they've got 9 lots, really, I think was the important bit. Number 4. The width of square B is twice that of square A. The perimeter of A is 32 centimetres. Right, width of a square. So first things first, I've got to make sure it's really clear in my mind. I know what a square is, and of course the fancy feature of a square is that all sides are the same, so this is going to be useful. So if the perimeter is 32, I need 4 numbers that are the same that add up to 32. And I think that 4 times 8 is 32, so I think my side must be 84. Oh, sorry, 84. Must be 8, but 4 times, silly me. And then it says the width of B is twice as big. So that means if these are all the sides, 8 and 8, the width of this must be 16, because it's twice as big. And now, what is the perimeter of square B? Well, if all the sides are 16, I could do 16 multiplied by 4, or I could do 16 plus 16 plus 16 plus 16. Whichever way you do that, 16 plus 16 is 32, and 32 doubled is 64. So 64 is our answer in centimetres, so I guess we should really add on the centimetres at the end. Number 5. What is the perimeter of this shape? Well, of course, the perimeter requires us to add up all the sides, but that includes these 2 as yet unknown sides. So, if, for example, I know that this along here is 23, and this along here is 34, the difference between them should be this measurement here. So what I can do is 34, minus 23, and then whatever value that is, in this case 11, is going to be the length of this segment. Now here, just to be clear, so I guess it doesn't look as clear, I think this is actually 18 along. Let's just fill that in, make it look a little bit clearer. So if this whole length is 18, and this section here is 3, I know the difference between them must be the height. So in here, I think the difference must be 15. Now that I've worked out all of the lengths or all of the sides, I can go on to work out whatever value I need. And so I would go and add them all up together. There is actually another trick that you can do, because of course, if 23 plus 11 has to add up 34, you can just use the longer sides to say, well, I know that these are going to add up 34, so I'm going to do 34 plus 34 plus this 18 plus these 2 sides, which is also going to add up to 18. And if I add all these together, actually again you could sort of double them and then add them together, you will end up with the answer. So I would do 34 plus 34, which is 68, plus 18, which is 86, plus 18, which is 104. Now in this case it shouldn't actually say centimetres squared, so excuse me, correct that now, just centimetres, because of course it is only asking you for the perimeter, and the perimeter is a measurement round the outside, so I think 104 centimetres is the correct answer. Hopefully that's nice and clear. Number 7. Pete's toy is £2.45 and Guy's is £1.17. How much more expensive is Pete's toy than Guy's toy? So this is actually just secretly asking you for the difference. Now, since it wants it in pennies, I would be tempted to convert right at the start before I do any maths. The £2.45 is 245 pennies, and £1.78 is 178 pennies. And then you don't even have to worry about subtracting the decimal. But if we just do the subtraction, we should get an answer. But just to remind ourselves, we can't do 8 from 5. So instead we have to borrow from the 10. So we have 4 tens. Let me do that in a different colour. So we're going to do that in 4 tens, becoming 3 tens. But now we've freed up a 10, we can make that 15. So 15, sort of take away 8, is going to leave 7. So here we've got 3 take away 70, or 30 take away 70. We can't do that, so we have to borrow from the hundreds. So the 200s become 100s. By freeing up 100, we've now got 10 tens. That means we've got 13 tens, take away 7 tens. And sorry, let's make that a bit more like a 7. So we've got 13 tens, take away 7 tens, and that's going to leave us with 6 tens. And 100, take away 100 is no hundreds. So I think the answer is 67 pence. Number 8. Colin got 90 marks in the exam, which was 60%. How many marks are available in total? This is a really good question. So it's not that he got 90 out of 100. He got 90 out of something, and that equals 60%. I think the key to understanding this is realizing we've got like an equivalent fraction going on here potentially, but only if we realize that 60% means 60 out of 100. And so this is the question we're facing. So we need some kind of way of getting here. Now I might actually do this in a couple of steps. Actually, let me just show you how to set this up slightly differently. So I move that down here. So if we start with 60 out of 100, and if I want to end up with it being 90 out of something, I'm going to see if I can sort of do like a halfway house. So I want to go from 60 to 90, and I can't just add or subtract. It can only be through division or multiplication. So I think if I go to 30, so from 60 to 30 out of something, by dividing by 2, I can then, hopefully, you can see how I can get to 90 by multiplying by 3. So I've sort of planned my journey a little bit out here. So I'm going to halve it to start with, then times by 3, and then whatever I've got on the bottom will be my answer. So let's do the same thing. Remember, if we're keeping equivalent fractions with the same fractions, we have to do the same thing. So we're dividing by this side by 2 as well, which gives us 50. So 60 out of 100 should be the same out of 30 as 50. And then if I then multiply both by 3, it should be the same as 90 out of 150. So it's obviously a big exam, 150 questions, and it did quite well. So I think the total number of marks is this bottom number, which I now know is 150. So I think that the question mark is 150. And therefore that is the answer. I hope that's clearly explained, and how you can use equivalent fractions, your knowledge of the link between percentages and fractions to answer that. Quite a tough one, that one, but a good one. Number 9. Wayne is 1.45 metres tall, and Jackie is 128 centimetres tall. By how many centimetres is Wayne taller than Jackie? So this is very similar to before. We want an answer in centimetres. So the first thing we'll do is convert Wayne's 1.42 metres into 142 centimetres. And I can do that because I know the difference between metres and centimetres. Centi as in like century is 100. And I then know that if metres is the large unit, I need more smaller centimetres to be equivalent. So I'm timesing by 100. And in this case, we were looking again, it's another different style question. So I think we're then subtracting the two values from each other. So we've got 142 minus 128. Again, I'm going to borrow from the 4s. So from 4 tens to 3 tens, that frees up 1 10 to put next to my 2 to give me 12. Take away 8, which is 4. Or 3 tens, take away 2 tens, which is 1 10. And that 100, take away 100, which is no hundreds. So 14 centimetres is my answer. Number 10. The cost of going to the cricket in pounds is 18A plus 8.5C, where A is the number of adults and C is the number of children. If 3 adults and 2 children of family go to the cricket, how much will it cost in total? Okay, so this looks maybe a little scary with lots of things going on here, but this is really just a substitution. So to start with, I'm going to write out a little formula it's given us, which is 18 lots of the adults plus £8.50 or 8.5 lots per children. So I think the important thing here is for us to realise it is a substitution, so we're going to be replacing with the A and the C with the 3 and the 2, but we can't just write the 3 in, it's not 183. And that's because with the rules of algebra, when you've got a number next to a letter like this, you just have to know there is a secret time sign. So I'm going to do the substitution, but I'm going to make sure I do it by writing 18 times the value of A and 8.5 times the value of C, which is 2. So let's write that out then. So we've got 18 multiplied by 3, which is the number of adults, and £8.50 times 2, which is the number of children. And this is now what I need to work out. So, however you choose to do this, 18 times 3, or 18 plus 18 plus 18 is going to get you to 54. And for £8.50, I might do 8 times 2, which is 16. Half, or 50p times 2 is 1. And 16 plus 1 is 17. And now I've got 54 plus 17, which equals £71. And so that is my answer for number 10, which is the final question of this section. Moving on to number 4 now, word form. You need to read the sentence below, work out what the missing word is, and try and fill in the question so it makes as much sense as possible, and you have to choose the best answer. So if there's 2 options that maybe could work, you need to pick the best of those. And as before, going back to multiple choice, if you make mistakes, you'll have crossed them out and recircled them. So, here's the example. I asked John to something the ball to me. Is it passed, purchase, pasta, provoke, or pass? In this case, I think here, I asked John to pass the ball to me. Makes sense because they're playing football or catch or something. So the correct answer to this practice question should have been E. Let's now jump into the main questions. So, the appraisal had been something until tomorrow. Well, I want a word that means delayed, I think. And in this case, if you defer something, you delay it. So it had been deferred until tomorrow morning. Number 2, she hadn't something that she was meant to go first. In this case, I think she hadn't realised that she was meant to go first. She didn't know. Number 3, they were angered by the government's actions. They were angered, they were annoyed by what went on. Number 4, the referee is motioning to her fellow assistants to get their attention, perhaps asking them for their opinion. So she's sort of waving at them. Motioning is like a hand signal to get their attention. Number 5, I had to something on my promise. This is a tough one, but the word is renege. If you renege on a promise, it means you sort of fail to live up to it. It's kind of like going back on your word, going back on a promise. None of the others really make sense in context, but reneging on a promise means you don't do what you've asked, which is something to try and avoid if you can. Number 6, he was something to play for his local team rather than one further away. He was inclined to play for his local team rather than one further away. Inclined means sort of motivated to do or have a preference, and that makes sense. You'd want to play for your local team rather than one that's far away because it's obviously easy or difficult to get to. Number 7, we wanted to something for tickets to the concert, and in this case I think you wanted to apply for tickets to the concert. Number 8, the traveller had something around the world. In this case the traveller had, past tense, journeyed around the world, so we need to make sure the tenses match. So if he had done something that's in the past, so he had journeyed around the world. Number 9, he hadn't meant to imply anything bad. Sort of this person maybe has accidentally offended someone, but he didn't mean to. He didn't mean to imply anything negative. Number 10, it had always something with him that his friend was a better player. In this case, it had always rankled with him. Now, if something rankles, it kind of annoys or aggravates or winds you up is probably the closest word. So it always wound him up a bit that his friend was a better player. He's obviously feeling a little bit jealous, which is a shame. He should be happy for his friend instead. But E, rankled, is definitely the answer. Number 11, the sense of foreboding was palpable. Great sentence. You could use that in your creative writing. If something is foreboding, it's almost like worrying or intimidating, or something is going to happen that you think is negative. And this sense of worry was palpable. That means like feelable or sensible. You can reach out and touch it. So this is like almost like maybe for a horror story. The sense of concern and worry and foreboding was touchable, was palpable. Really cool sentence that. That might be worth stealing for future creative writing projects. Number 12. I drew the curtains to let the sunshine in. In this case, if you draw curtains, it's to move them either way. So the act of drawing a curtain is just sliding it along the rails so it can go in both directions, both for open and for close. But in this case, because it was yesterday morning, it has to be the past tense, so I drew the curtains. To make them sort of let in or keep out the light. Number 13. Today we are considering the best approach to lobby our MP. So if you lobby your MP, that means you're just asking for something. So maybe they want to get something new built or some extra things added to the park, perhaps. But if you're considering something, it means you're thinking about it, and so they're planning the best approach. They're considering, thinking about the best way to get what they want. Number 14. She couldn't accept that she had been beaten in the game. That's a shame. She's obviously not a very good loser. You've got to be a good winner and a good loser. So she couldn't accept that. Would be the correct tense. She couldn't come to terms with the truth. Right, everybody. Thank you so much. That is the end of paper 1. Of course, keep an eye out for paper 2, where we'll go through the second half. Thanks, everybody. Bye bye.